In the summer of 2001, Leah Davis was 22 years old and between lives. She had just dropped out of her second year of college, a combination of money troubles, burnout, and a creeping sense that the degree she was chasing wasn't leading anywhere she actually wanted to go. So she packed up her things, said goodbye to her tiny shared apartment in Flagstaff, and hit the road. Her plan was to stay with a childhood friend in Boulder for a few weeks, maybe longer if things worked out. But Leah didn't have a car. She had a duffel bag, a well-worn Army surplus backpack, and a habit she picked up the previous summer while traveling the Southwest: hitchhiking. It was dangerous, she knew that, but it was also something she felt weirdly in control of. She prided herself on her gut instincts. If a car pulled over and the driver gave her even the slightest bad feeling, she'd just smile and wave them on. She always had an out. Or so she thought. She left Flagstaff early on a Wednesday morning and made it about 2 hours north by mid-afternoon, catching rides from a pair of college kids and a retired couple in a Winnebago. By the time she was dropped off at a gas station just outside Gallup, New Mexico, the sun was already starting to dip low, and the traffic on the highway had thinned to almost nothing. She debated calling it a day and finding a motel, but she didn't want to spend the money, and besides, she was used to long waits. That's when a faded green pickup truck pulled into the lot. The driver got out to pump gas, a man, maybe mid-40s, wearing dusty jeans, a red flannel, and a trucker hat that said Mesa Salvage Co. Leah watched him discreetly from the curb. He wasn't smiling, he didn't even look her way, just stood there, one hand on the pump, the other scratching at his temple.
But when he went inside to pay, he came out carrying 2 Gatorades. Without making eye contact, he walked over and held one out to her. "I'm heading north," he said, voice low, "toward Farmington, if you need a lift." Leah hesitated. "What's your name?" she asked. "Joe." That was it. No last name, no small talk, just Joe. She almost declined, but she was tired and he didn't give off that overt creep energy, just seemed quiet, maybe a little awkward. So she nodded. "Okay, thanks." The first half hour passed in silence. Joe didn't play music, didn't speak unless spoken to, just drove, one hand on the wheel, the other resting flat on his leg. The cab of the truck smelled like motor oil and coffee. Leah tried to make conversation, where he was from, what he did, but got mostly one-word answers. "Arizona," he said. "Drive salvage." They passed through a few long stretches of empty desert where the only thing on the horizon was a shimmer of heat and brush. And then, out of nowhere, Leah saw something on the road up ahead. A dead coyote, stretched out just across the shoulder line. She flinched a little as they passed it. "Poor thing," she muttered. "You see those a lot out here?" Joe didn't answer, but his hands tightened on the steering wheel. His jaw shifted like he was grinding his teeth. That was the first time Leah felt something was off. She glanced at him. His eyes were fixed ahead, unblinking. Then he said, calmly, "You ever think about what it'd feel like to die out here? No phones, no one for miles. You think if someone died out here, anyone would even find them?" It wasn't a question. It was more like he was talking to himself. Leah laughed, but it came out hollow. "That's morbid." Joe smiled, but there was no warmth behind it. A minute later, he said, "You remind me of the girl from Santa Fe." Leah's stomach dropped. She tried to keep her voice even. "Oh yeah? Who's that?" He didn't answer. The silence that followed felt tight, like the air in the cab was getting thinner, like something was about to snap. She reached down slowly and opened her backpack, pretending to fish around for something, but really trying to discreetly check for the small folding knife she kept in the side pouch. Then, in the rearview mirror, she noticed something. There was a tarp in the truck bed, something long and lumpy beneath it. The corner had flipped up just enough for her to see something that looked like a boot. Or a foot. Panic started to rise in her chest. She told Joe she needed a bathroom break. Tried to sound casual. No rest stops for another 30 miles, he said. Then she said she was carsick. Needed air. He didn't slow down. Finally, she blurted out, "I think I'm going to throw up. Please, pull over." Joe glanced at her, eyes narrowed. He veered onto the gravel shoulder, slowed and stopped. As soon as the truck rolled to a halt, Leah fumbled with the door, pushing it open and stumbling out. She bent over, pretending to gag. Joe stepped out too, slowly walking around the front of the truck. "You all right?" he asked, but there was no concern in his voice. Leah stood up straight and ran. She didn't look back, just bolted down the embankment into the brush. She heard him shout behind her, a door slam, footsteps pounding gravel. She ran until her lungs burned, cut herself on brambles, scraped her knees. She had no idea where she was going, just away. Eventually, she found a hollow beneath a ridge of rock, just big enough to squeeze into. She lay there for what felt like hours, heart racing, too scared to move, certain Joe would come looking. But he never did. Only after night had fully fallen, when the wind had picked up and the heat of the day had disappeared, did she finally crawl out and peek over the edge of the ridge. The road was still empty, but in the distance, just barely, she saw headlights. One car, small, moving slow. Leah sprinted toward it, stumbling out of the brush and onto the shoulder, waving her arms frantically. The car slowed. A woman rolled down the window. Within minutes, they were headed to a nearby ranger station. Police later interviewed Leah, and she gave a detailed description: the truck, the hat, the man's face, the tarp. But there was no trace of the vehicle. No prints, no footage. Just tire tracks near where she'd been picked up. One of the officers told her something that chilled her even more. Back in 1998, 3 years earlier, a young woman named Caitlin Herrera had been reported missing while hitchhiking from Santa Fe to Phoenix. The last person to see her said she got into a green pickup truck with a man wearing a trucker hat. Her body was found 2 weeks later, strangled, dumped in a ravine off the same highway Leah had run from. Leah listened in silence, and when the officer finished speaking, she asked only one question. "Did he ever give a name?" The officer nodded. "Yeah." Said it was Joe. The sun had just begun to dip behind the Pennsylvania hills when Mark Pulaski stuck out his thumb. It was October of 1983, and Mark, 27, was on his way to his cousin's wedding in the tiny town of New Hope, a speck on the map nestled in the folds of the Appalachian Mountains. His old Toyota overheated about 20 miles from town, smoke pouring from under the hood like a chimney. No cell phones, no passing cars, just forest, hills, and silence. After letting the engine cool and realizing it wasn't going anywhere, he locked the doors and started walking. His plan was simple: hitch a ride to the wedding, ask around, come back with help later. The road he followed twisted through trees already half bare with the season. The sky was growing darker by the minute. Mark pulled his pea coat tighter and walked with purpose, though he was starting to wonder if he'd make it before nightfall. Then he heard the familiar sound of a car engine approaching from behind. A pale yellow station wagon came slowly around a bend, its headlights glowing soft and gold in the dust. Mark raised a hand. The car pulled over without hesitation. Behind the wheel was a woman in her mid-60s, wearing a knit sweater and driving gloves. The inside of the car looked lived in. Dog hair on the seats, cassette tapes in the console, the faint smell of cinnamon gum. "You're dressed up handsomely for an evening stroll," she said. "Yeah, I ran into some car troubles." "By chance, are you headed to New Hope?" She nodded. "Hop in." The two of them drove in comfortable silence for a few minutes. The woman, her name was Nadine, was friendly but not chatty. She asked where he was going, made a quick joke about wedding food, and turned the radio down when the signal started to fade into static. About 10 minutes in, they crested a ridge. Just over the curved horizon, Mark saw her. A girl standing at the edge of the woods. She looked maybe 16, dark hair curled neatly, small clutch in hand, and a light blue dress that flared at the knees, not at all suited for the chilly weather. She wore a white shawl over her shoulders, clasped by a silver heart-shaped locket. She didn't wave, didn't move, just stood there. "You mind if we pick her up?" Nadine asked. Mark blinked. "You know her?" "I give her a ride from time to time." That was all she said. The girl climbed into the back seat without a word. The door clicked shut. Mark turned to greet her, but she didn't acknowledge him, just folded her hands in her lap and stared quietly at the road ahead. The silence in the car thickened. The air grew noticeably colder. Mark glanced back again. The girl hadn't moved, but something about her seemed strange. Her skin was pale, like porcelain. Her expression vacant and distant. But most of all, it was the dress. Clean, pressed, but a few decades out of time. He noticed the silver locket again. It shimmered slightly, catching the low light. "Where are you heading to all dressed up?" he asked softly. "I'm on my way to a wedding," he continued, but trailed off when she didn't reply. A minute later, they passed over an old railroad bridge. Mark turned to look out the window, glancing at the ravine below, and when he turned back, the back seat was empty. The girl was gone. Mark looked at Nadine, stunned. She didn't seem surprised at all. "She doesn't stay long," she said. "Who was she? What's going on?" Mark asked. Nadine paused, then answered. "Her name was Clara. Her father was driving her to a school dance. Took this same road, lost control on the bridge, and went over." Mark felt a chill crawl up his neck. "Wait, you're telling me she's dead?" "A ghost?" he asked. Nadine nodded. He survived. He couldn't live with the grief and took his own life a year later. They didn't speak the rest of the way. At the wedding, Mark did his best to join the celebration. The small white church sat at the edge of town, tucked beside a wooded hill. During the reception, needing a moment to clear his head, he slipped outside to get some air. He wandered past the edge of the lot and noticed a narrow path behind the church, half hidden beneath vines and overgrowth. Something drew him toward it. The path opened onto a small, forgotten graveyard. He stepped carefully between moss-covered stones and cracked headstones until something caught his eye. A glint of silver in the dirt. It was a locket. Lying at the base of a headstone. He picked it up gently, wiped away the dirt, and read the inscription on the grave. Clara Bell Hart, 1940 to 1956. Forever our shining girl. Mark froze. She had died on October 12th, 1956. His birthday. He stood there for a long time, the locket warm in his hand despite the cold. He carefully placed the locket atop the headstone and headed back to the wedding. When he returned to Pittsburgh a few days later, he called the New Hope Public Library. An elderly woman answered. Mark asked about the graveyard behind the church and a girl named Clara Hart. There was a pause. Clara Hart. the woman repeated. Yes. She died in a wreck on County Road 14. She and her father slipped on the ice and went off Lewis Bridge. Her father made it. She didn't. Poor girl, she was only 16. That was, nearly 30 years ago now. Her mother Nadine still lives in town. Are you related? No, thank you for your time, Mark replied, and gently hung up the phone. Though he never saw her again, every year until his passing, Mark would drive out to Old County Road 14 on his birthday and leave flowers on the bridge. In the summer of 1994, a man named Jake Emery vanished without a trace from the Olympic National Forest in Washington. And to this day, no one has been able to explain what happened. But there is one man who claims to have witnessed the last moments Jake was ever seen alive. His name was Russell Grant, and what he experienced has never officially been explained. Russell was 34 years old and a seasoned outdoorsman. That August, he'd just wrapped up a long, solo hike through the backcountry near Lake Wenatchee. It was getting late, maybe an hour before sundown, and Russell was driving his old Ford pickup along a dusty forest road, heading toward the ranger station. He came around a bend, and that's when he saw someone up ahead, walking on the side of the road. The man looked like a fellow backpacker, mid to late 20s, lean build, wearing a canvas jacket, boots, and a forest ranger-style hat. A rucksack was hoisted over one shoulder, and he moved at a pace like he'd just had a long hike and needed a lift. Russell slowed down, leaned out the window, and asked, "You headed toward Wenatchee?" The man nodded. "Yeah, can I catch a lift?" Russell told him to toss his gear in the truck bed and hop in. The guy introduced himself as Jake, and the two made small talk as they drove. Jake said he'd been out solo camping for a few nights and had gotten turned around, trying to find a quicker trail back to the road. For the next 20 minutes, it was an easy ride. Just two guys, road-dusted and tired, cruising under the canopy of towering pine trees. But just as they came out of the woods and into a clearing near an open stretch of field, that's when things got strange. Russell was the first to see it, a faint light, floating just above the tree line in the distance. It wasn't moving, it wasn't blinking, it was just there, hovering. He pulled the truck over, and both men stepped out. The light was too low to be a star or a plane, too still to be a helicopter, and it wasn't glowing like a flare. It was pulsing, very gently, almost like it was breathing. Jake said, "What is that?" Russell didn't answer. He didn't have one. Then, a second light blinked into existence. And then, a third, and then a fourth. All of them hovered in the air over the field. They didn't flicker. They didn't drift. They just moved, slowly, deliberately, like they were dancing around one another. No sound, no beams. Just these silent, glowing orbs weaving through the night sky. As the last of the sunlight retreated behind the horizon, the two men stood there, transfixed, watching these glowing lights grow brighter against the darkening sky. After a few minutes, behind them, the sound of tires crunching against gravel snapped them from their trance. A police cruiser pulled up. No siren, just red and blue lights spinning in the quiet darkness. An officer stepped out, hand on his belt, and asked, "You two been watching those lights?" Russell and Jake nodded. The officer introduced himself as Officer Benny Johnston.
We've had a few calls tonight from other campers. Nobody knows what they are. How long have you been seeing them? Officer Johnston asked. Before either man could respond, one of the lights began moving differently than before. It peeled off from the others and drifted toward them, slowly but steadily. And as it got closer, the air seemed to change. The light didn't waver, it didn't make a sound, but every hair on Russell's arms stood up. The cruiser's engine shut off. So did the headlights on Russell's truck. Dead silence. The orb continued toward them, and as it passed over the edge of the field, they finally saw it clearly. It wasn't an orb at all. It was a cylindrical object, smooth and metallic. No windows, no markings, no visible engines or rotors. Just this perfectly symmetrical, silent object floating about 100 yards away, 30 feet off the ground. The officer stepped back toward his cruiser and placed a hand on his firearm. Russell didn't move. He couldn't. Fear had frozen him in place. Jake stepped forward. He walked off the gravel road into the field, toward the object. "What is that thing?" he whispered to himself. Officer Johnston shouted towards him. "Hey, don't go near that thing." Jake half turned back to look at Russell and then continued into the field. He reached the halfway point, maybe 50 yards from the hovering object. Then there was a blinding flash of light. All three men were thrown to the ground. Russell landed hard on his side. The cruiser's sirens suddenly roared to life. The truck headlights blinked back on. The radio inside the cruiser screamed static. The officer scrambled to his feet, ran to the cruiser, and switched off the lights. Russell staggered up, leaning against the truck for support. The field was empty, dark and silent. The floating lights were gone. Russell ran into the field, yelling Jake's name, but was only met with the hum of the forest. Officer Johnston ran into the field after Russell, flashlight in hand. They found a burned-out patch of grass where Jake had last been standing, but no sign of him. At the station, the two men filed a report. The officer backed up everything Russell said, but still, the official explanation was inconclusive. A search crew scoured the area for 3 days. They found Jake's boot prints, the edge of the field, and then nothing. To this day, Jake Emery or his body have never been found. Just a report, signed by two men, describing lights in the sky, a strange object, and a man who walked into a field and was never seen again.